In Cyberpunk Edgerunners, David Martinez is a pure example of opportunity born through tragedy. He slaps a military-grade piece of cyberware onto his back and starts down his own path to his own version of greatness. Anyone able to, and with the desire to, have tried out his build in Cyberpunk 2077. But what about playing him in the game that spawned 2077 outright? Building his character in Cyberpunk Red, the newest version of the Cyberpunk tabletop game, is something you can pull off right at character creation. We're not talking about him, though, at the end of the series. No, this is going to be him right whenever he starts joining up with Maine and the rest of the crew. And yes, the Sandevistan is included. I am going to cover a few base things first off, and I'll make sure to provide a timestamp to just jump straight to what you want to in the build if that's what you're here for. But some stuff has to be covered first for newer faces to the game. First things to get out of the way for people who've never played or read about Cyberpunk Red is it is a skill-based game rather than a class-based game. Your characters are more about what skills you know as them, rather than what class you pick at the start of a game giving you features. In Red, you're going to be taking on roles instead of classes, and roles are definitely more like flavors of play rather than locking you in and out of other options. If you want to go more in depth, I got multiple shorts and videos about roles and what they do, so if you need to peek those out, feel free, but you won't need to for this video. Also, so it's out there, in Cyberpunk Red, the Sandevistan does not function mechanically as it does in Cyberpunk 2077 or Edgerunners. When building David, though, I accounted for this, don't worry. In this build, I'm going to first lay out the stats, then I'm going to lay out the skills separated up into groups that share the same level, cover his weapons, gear, and cyberware, and then at the end, I'll explain the playstyle. We're going to be putting him together through a process of character creation called the Complete Package, where he is going to be built entirely from scratch. I'm not going to cover life path roles, and this is going to be purely just the mechanical side of things, and I'm going to leave the rest for you to fill out. Life path is more about background, lore, and flavor. First though, let's tear down the theory and see what makes David Martinez who he is. So the first steps were to figure out what his character style was really about. When analyzing the character, let's face it, he wasn't some sharpshooting ace. There was though one thing he had working for him. He was tough, and the constant reminders of how he was very resistant to the symptoms of cyberpsychosis kept coming up in the anime. Remember, we're making the David when he first joined Maine's crew, not the David after he takes the crew over. I'm setting you up to turn into that. He definitely needed high willpower to back up his mental resistance, reflecting his resistance to not only the cyberware, but also the torture he was put through. So what I did is I matched his willpower to his empathy. His toughness was next, and I made sure that lined up with his body stat. The kid is a talker, so I lined up his luck and cool to reflect that. He really is getting out of situations for the most part by either sheer luck or being able to talk his way out of things, such as when he first meets Maine's crew or when they try to snag JK. He's a great face, and he uses that strength well. For what doesn't shine but doesn't bite, I kept his tech, dexterity, and reflex relatively average. And, well, to be fair, the kid needed a weakness. So I followed up with intelligence being his lowest stat. He makes bad calls, and those bad calls kept having snowball effects that led him into worse situations. When making David, I had to account for the fact that the Sandy does not work like it does in the anime. I also had to take into account he's not really a shooter. He's got practice with a handgun, but he's not that good at it. While I was trying to figure out what path to take here, I actually had the answer in the first episodes on a rewatch. The kid always has the advantage of being the first to act or react. Speed is his thing, and that's what I tapped into in a way. We'll get to the Sandy ahead in the cyberware section. For David's movement, I put him almost at the top. And this is also something that helped me pick Solo as his role very early on. Solos have a role ability called Combat Awareness, and in this ability lies a very specific sub-ability called Initiative Reaction. This gives you an additional point of initiative the more points you put into it. So, just have 4 points always loaded into Initiative Reaction unless the situation calls for it to be moved around. David's build quickly became what we started to call in my crew an initiative manipulator. Act first before your opponents can became the motto. So, to get through the theory and into his direct stats, his highest stats are at 8, and they are both willpower and empathy, reflecting his resilience and resistance to both mental and physical strain. Next, his body, movement, and luck line up at 7 each, falling in line with how tough life has made him, while also tapping into his speed-based approach granted with the Sandy, and luck being his plot armor for those clutch moments. I follow that up with dexterity and cool being at 6, making sure he can handle himself in both a fistfight and function on the streets as a talker. Up next, Reflex lines up at 5, average-based, because without the Sandy, he's not really someone who already was dodging bullets, and he was an okay shot. Follow it up with 4 in both intelligence and tech. He was street smart, not book smart, and he was still in school. So, that altogether is the stats setup we're going for with David. And while some may argue he's a character that has a much higher reflex, without the Sandevistan, he's not pulling off moves like that. So for the theme, I had to account for it another way. He's learning. He's not the boss yet. Now we get into the framework of his starting skills. When setting him up, I had to take into account that I had to be sure he would at least survive in the setting for Cyberpunk Red, while also keeping to the theme of the character. Due to how many skills there are and how many choices, to make this easier to follow, it's broken up into groups of skills with the levels of 2, 4, and 6, with 6 being the highest a skill can go during character creation. The first set of skills we will go over is those we're slapping 2 levels into, and it also includes the basic survival skills as well. So, we're putting 2 points into Stealth, Education, Street Slang, and Local Expert for the basics. For skills that tap into his character though, we're going to put 2 points into Deduction, due to his Eureka moment about JK. He's got his moments, and we'll also put 2 points into Basic Tech as well. The kid could at least operate a BD Wreath and a few other things. He wasn't amazing, but it's just something to have extra there. Oh, and he's getting no points in any driving skill. He can't drive. Says it himself and keeps proving it. He cannot drive. The second set of skills we'll cover is what we're putting 4 into, which were the skills that I felt really held the theme up and also made him capable of surviving even out of combat. You need a lot more foundation than just being able to shoot well or punch well when it comes to playing in Cyberpunk Red. It doesn't hurt, but there's more to surviving than combat. So, for the skills we're putting 4 into, we're going to be putting them first into Concentration, Perception, Endurance, and Resist Torture and Drugs first off. Next, we're putting 4 points into Acting because he does fall back on duping folks when he has to. Next skills that are going to get 4 are going to be Conversation, Human Perception, and Persuasion for his street smart side, which I'm going to bolster even further by adding 4 points into Streetwise. He's already dealt with XBDs, and let's face it, Doc is a good connection when he wants stuff. And to push his charismatic side a little bit more, we're going to be putting 4 into both Wardrobe and Style and Personal Grooming. The kid has his style, and we're going to reflect it. Finally, I put 4 points into First Aid. His mom would have taught him a thing or two due to her job, and treating his own wounds would be something he's unfortunately used to due to his treatment at Arasaka Academy. But now, we're going to get into the third set of skills, which are set to 6, which I thought were the main things David showed off to a high extent. First off, Brawling and Evasion both get 6 points, as well as Athletics. David is a close-range scrapper. Even when using the Sandy early on, he's using it to brawl, not shoot people. Being able to duck a punch is just as important as being able to throw one. This also helps huge in disarming enemies or using them as shields. I did not add in melee weapon into this mix, and instead put 6 points into Handgun. David had that Lexington, and while he wasn't initially a great shot, he did grow into it. Up next, we're going to quickly cover his weapons, armor, and gear. In a complete package build, you get 2,550 eddies to spend on everything. So, this is what I picked up in the build. For a weapon, we're sticking in his hand a heavy pistol, to get that rate of fire of 2, so you can pop off 2 attacks per turn with it. I was really torn about this, and even asked you guys in a poll which it would really be, because he had a Lexington and it looked and felt more like a medium pistol. But we had a moment in testing where he rolled 3 6s in a row. Fate spoke for us, so we went with the heavy pistol. I also threw in 50 basic rounds of ammunition for it. Next, we'll be giving him a light armor jack, giving him a piece of 11 SP armor. I at first played around with it just being Kevlar, but the survivability was just horrid. I was dying way too often. It's the time of the red, not 2077, and you're gonna be taking more bullets than you expect. No headgear, we don't want to mess up his hair. As for a few items in his kit, he's got a handheld agent, an air hypo for emergencies, and a load of immunoblockers in for the future, along with a personal care pack, and glow paint, to tag freely if he gets the urge to do it to more than just his mom's jacket. Now, we get into the cyberware. David's going to be packing first a cyber audio suite, and with it, an internal agent. This represents all those calls and communications we see in the anime, and honestly the ones we get in 2077 in general. You can choose either this, or you can choose the handheld. But if you want to keep to theme, keep the internal despite its cost. Next, he's also using a neural link. And to follow through again with the 2077 theme, he's got interface plugs. Now we get to a piece of his core as a build and as a character, the Sandevistan. In Cyberpunk Red, the Sandevistan has a very specific effect. When activated, it increases initiative by 3 for 1 full minute. This doesn't seem like much, but when we go into how to use this build, you're going to see how useful this really is. And at the tail end here, we get 800 eddies to spend on anything fashion-based on top of the initial 2,550. With this, we'll snag him some Urban Flash bottoms, footwear, a top, jewelry, and a jacket, which obviously is his mom's. We'll also get him a set of leisurewear clothes too, to be able to work out in at least. We'll also spend some of that extra eddies for a biomonitor, and since it links to your agent, you've now got an internal read of your vitals if you keep the internal agent. That's the build, so how do you use it? In testing it first, we kept David at range, just using his handgun, and it didn't work out too well. What shined was taking him into close-range combat. Using the combination of the Sandevistan and combat awareness points being pumped into initiative reaction, he was starting off at a baseline of +7 to his initiative rolls. Being able to act first, David could close distance with his super high move stat and immediately disarm an enemy with his high brawling. That's actually what had hit me when we were trying to figure out this kid's build. Snatching cred chips out of the air, snatching Polar's cigarette, it suddenly made sense and put a fun spin on how to use him. Running up full speed and snatching enemies' guns and using them on them, or even beating them with the butts became more funny and way too entertaining than it was worth. All the testing done with David was always on unfair grounds. He was always outnumbered. And relying on his high mobility and closing the distance to scrap were what made him be able to come out on top in every fight he won. He's really good at taking what enemies have. What we have in the end is a speedster scrapper, a character that can close distance first and disable a problem before it even has the chance to become one. We see this in the show, with his ability to snatch small angry gremlins from fridges before the enemy even knows he's doing it. The stats and skills here are also set up for a very powerful character later down the line. You've got extremely high empathy, meaning your humanity is sitting at 80. And that means you can do some major cyberware upgrades, even fully Borging yourself out. Empathy this high lines up with his ability to handle cyberware, and you can grow into how he was when he took over the crew. The kid is tenacious, and it shows. And to address why I did not give him the ability to dodge bullets, which in Cyberpunk Red you can do if you have a reflex, is because that would grant him the ability to do that at all times. Unlike him only being able to do it when he's using the Sandy. This is why it was decided to make it to be only so he can act before the enemy can. If you do wish to go this route, I recommend dropping Will by 2 points and Body by 1 point. Remember though, bullet dodging may sound strong, but if you screw up, you're gonna feel it. Cyberware that can be swapped out as well is gonna be the internal agent, Cyber Audio Suite, and the interface plugs. Those are in to keep with the 2077 theme. But if you're really wanting to spend some extra eddies, those are droppable if you'd like. This is a framework that can be modified by anyone to meet their needs, and it follows theme more than function. It is not designed to be overpowered. If you do feel there is a better way to pull this off, I'm all ears in the comments below. But with this design, you're still able to play our fresh young David Martinez at the start of his life as an edge runner. Let's hope you can keep him alive long enough to see him shine. And you better get paid quick. You're out of eddies. And rent's coming up. Take care, everyone, and I hope you find yourselves a good table.